All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's winter time, but it's also Thursday, and that means we're here for another edition of the MSP Initiative live. Today, got two special guests. We bring back Mr. Larry Cobrin from MSPCFO, and Larry's the guy who's trying to make sure you understand your math, right? And he's going to help us with some thoughts today on that. And then for the first time, I believe, we're bringing Ian Richardson from Doberman Technologies. We ran into Ian in person on the Channel Strong Tour at the end of last year in the great state of Michigan.
That's
right. Are you back
in
Michigan now?
I am in Michigan. It is cold. There's snow outside. It's gross.
Yeah, well, that's why we got the hat going, right? I mean, it's
1 out of 10.
Definitely a winter time. So for anyone who hasn't met either of you, I just want to give you guys a chance to, introduce yourselves, give people a little background so that they understand that, you guys are talking from a place of pain, suffering, but knowledge. Larry, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
I thought we were going to go with Ian. He's more interesting than I am.
Don't undercut yourself, my friend.
So I founded MSPCFO about 5 years ago. We try to help. We have a couple hundred clients right now. And our goal is to help people understand where things are going right and things are going wrong within their business. Our sort of vision is that we try to show them where actual information is, which agreements, clients they can help fix, less than nice to know, how am I doing broadly, rather than, oh, here's a piece of information that I can chase down. And George, good to see you. We try to, not quite ready for the bus tour, but I am excited to get back on the road and see everybody in person again.
I mean, Ian, I'm sure once you give your little background, Ian can tell us about all his traveling he's been doing, and maybe tell us how the world looks outside of Michigan. Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah. I'm Ian. I'm CEO of Doberman Tech. We're a Michigan-based MSP with a big focus on healthcare, and I've been doing this game for 16 years now. So this is really all I've ever done. I dove in early in business, not because of some great idea, but because I'm really, really dumb. So that's my background and my story. And I'm a numbers guy, much like Larry. So I look at the numbers and try to make sure that numbers make sense with everything that I do. And as George alluded, I like to travel a lot. Recently, I've been going back and forth between Mexico and the US, and Mexico is just like Michigan, except with oceans, beaches, and no snow. So it's nothing like Michigan, and being where I'm at right now is terrible.
Well, I'm sure we're all looking forward to the temperature jumping like 25 degrees at least.
Right?
For sure. So today is sometimes I'm not going to call it a beat up topic, but we were PPP to death in 2020. Of course, we have a very, for our American facing audience, this is more pertaining to you. And sorry if you're international and listening in on this. I promise we'll bring you future content that'll fit everybody. But for our US facing people, a lot's changed in like the last 30 days on this topic, like in a big way. Like no more innuendo and this could and this may. Like we have more or less the marching orders, right? So before we get into anything new, let's talk about people last year who dove in, signed up, got funded, what that means now, right? Because we're in forgiveness phase, right? If you haven't already applied, and there's been changes there. And in a good way, right? Because now you actually are able to, depending on how that money, regardless of the situation, you may actually have spent that money in a good way, or have some money available to be strategic with a little bit. So let's get into the forgiveness component, right? Because I think that that's largely solidified. It was kind of a moving needle, right? What's covered, what's not, how much, what the form process looked like. I mean, everybody was all over the place in like Q4 on this. Ian, since you were really into PPP early and kind of cut it up and glued it back together again to figure out really what was happening. What is it, right now on the forgiveness front? How easy or hard is it? And where did everybody end up from a strategic taxation? Where do I spend this money standpoint?
Yep. So the three key numbers as far as my awareness. So let me start off with, I'm not a CPA. So, please don't, it's kind of just like that lawyer disclaimer, right? This isn't legal advice. This isn't tax accounting advice, right? So definitely touch base with your CPA or accounting professional for around your specific direction. But
100%. Yeah.
the three key numbers were 50, 152. So 50,000, 150,000, 2 million, right? And so $50,000 loans or less, you got a single page forgiveness attestation. You don't have to provide much documentation. You can provide some payroll reports, stuff like that around impact, and you're just going to cruise through and be quickly forgiven by your lender. Under 150, you can use a simplified, it's like a 2-page app, and provide documentation about payroll spend. So really just your payroll reports, self-reported utility spends. I fell into that second category, so I can kind of go through what I did to get 100% forgiveness when appropriate. And then 2 million, if you're under 2 million, you're not going to have that automatic audit, right? So if you got more than $2 million in triple P funding, first, congratulations. Second, congratulations, you're going to be having quite a good friend, right? The SBA is going to be coming out and having some intentional conversations with you. I'm guessing most of the people on this call fall underneath that $2 million mark, so it's going to be a little bit easier. And that's like the stance and understanding that I have. When it came to forgiveness, the current rule set, you've got and Matt Lee, what's up? I'm definitely gonna do that call out when I recognize someone's name. The current rule set for that 150 and under is you get a 2-page simplified application. You kind of run through and say, here is all of my payroll spend. So payroll payments to your direct employees, owner compensation under that $100,000 mark. For that time set period, and it's either 8 or 24 weeks, and there's a big asterisk. If you were early first round of triple P funding, you can elect to use that shorter period, and there's some certain situations where you might, certain situations where you might not. Elsewise, you use 24 weeks worth of data. And as long as you're above a 60% spend on payroll, so you use 60% of the funds to cover those payroll costs, you can get all the way up to 100% forgiveness if you're able to prove payroll forgiveness on it. That's kind of where it stands today.
I mean, it's a lot easier than the calculation and the limitations. And like in the beginning days, I mean, you're like, oh, I need a separate accounting system. I need a separate bank account. I got to do all this stuff, break it out in the classes in my QuickBooks. I got to do all this extra work. And a lot of that seems like it kind of disappeared.
Easy peasy, right? So think about payroll, rent and or mortgage interest, utilities. Right. And so most of us, so I own my office building, but my MSP doesn't own my office building. Right. So I charge myself rent so that I can take out property taxes. I can take out building maintenance funds. I can take out my mortgage, principal and interest. I can take out some profit to me. I can take out the income tax that I'm going to need to pay on that rental income. Right. Everyone kind of runs through a formula. But on the triple P funding, it's just a line item of rent, right? So you're able to get all of that stuff out. It doesn't matter who owns your building. It matters that you're paying rent. So you got a lease, you're covered, right? So rent was an easy one. Utilities, which you're thinking about, how can you classify utilities around your office space? Just adding all those up and putting it in, and then payroll costs. And so unless you're doing payroll yourself, a lot of the payroll providers really, really stepped up to bat here. So I use Paychex. There's a ton of them out there. But I went into my payroll system and there was a report. I just typed in, here's the start period of my loan. Here's the end period of my loan. It spat out a nice little PDF that had a number in yellow highlighter on it that said, hey, this is what you type into box 1A on the simplified forgiveness application. So you just copy and paste it in there. And I sent that report data along with my application to my bank.
Yeah, I had the same thing with Gusto, big Gusto fan, or Gusto, however you say it. My bank did come back and ask for quarterly filings, right, with the 941s and all that stuff, to back up the report, right? They wanted to see that and the healthcare payouts, to the insurance premiums and stuff like that. But that report was a good starter. They did want the background information on, when I, went back and sent it through for forgiveness. But the payroll companies, the automated stuff did definitely help. So the other thing that was worth mentioning was that there was a big question mark outside of forgiveness on, does the revenue, is this considered as income from a tax deduction standpoint, from an IRS, end of year, kind of business, taxation story. And going into the very final minutes of Q4, or at least a week or two, the answer was, oh no, this is, because we're giving you money, you can't deduct, right? So if you took, payroll expenses out of this and this and that and the other, guess what? That's going to end up as a, gross increase in revenue, right? On your top line. And then last second that changed, right? Like, in that last 2 weeks. And then now it's not, you can actually still take all the deductions. Is that correct?
Yeah, like as far as my understanding, yes. Again, like I always am careful on any sort of like, yeah, you can go ahead and do that on tax advice, right?
They have to confirm with their
Yeah.
CPAs and stuff, and hopefully they did that before the end of the year, right? But I mean, as far as preparing stuff for your filings, you may have been in a better position, right? Because now there's deductions from a congressional standpoint on the adjustments may have helped you out in the end, right?
Correct.
So go back, double check, but it sounds like that's the case from my understanding as well. And that's a good sign. So those were two really good outcomes from round one PPP. Everybody agree?
If I could jump in there, the thing about round one PPP, and my understanding, again, same caveat, I'm not a CPA.
Yep.
But George, I know you and I were chatting back and forth, waiting for the first round to be dispersed. The thing about PPP that kind of, I don't want to say it upset me because it really was a gift, and I can't be that upset about a gift, is they changed the rules constantly over the course of the year. Mm-hmm. I would go to the SBA or the Treasury website and look at the FAQs, which really was all they provided for guidance. There wasn't like a plan. There was just, you could read through the FAQs and they were numbered. I want to say when I accepted the money, there might have been 20 or 25 items on the FAQs. It's north of 60 now. I had spent the money, but now I was obligated to comply with rules that came out after the fact.
Yeah.
My dad used to say, all gifts have strings. Most of the rules were actually ended up being more favorable, but you had to change your behavior and then they changed the rules. For example, Ian's talking about rent and utilities and all that stuff. That wasn't originally part of PPP. PPP was originally just payroll. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, you know what, I have to survive. It's less so, I do believe it's less so for our businesses than for other industries. If I have to survive, and I don't think in 8 weeks, my biggest issue is going to be headcount. My biggest issue is going to be that nobody comes to my restaurant and how am I going to cover my rent?
Yeah.
I want to cover my rent for an extended period of time to keep myself available. But if I went by originally what was out there, I went through all the money keeping people on staff. The same is true about the forgiveness. And again, my understanding from reading everything that's come out is that it's a little complicated, but yes, basically it's not taxable income, the forgiveness. It's not exactly how they worded it, but they ended up saying that we're clear, we're not going to have a tax hit. But I was talking to colleagues in the fall saying, you know what, I'm going to make a big spend this year so that I can sink expenses into 2020 to offset this windfall that I'm going to get from PPP forgiveness.
Right.
That might not have been the best strategic decision for them in the long run, but it made sense because they had to offset this event.
Correct.
From mid to late December, this event never happened, and they made that investment. I just think, and given that we're on the cusp of round 2 of PPP, you got to be really careful because you could be led down a line of thinking of how you should behave.
Right.
And somebody else who is not following the letter of the law will find the law adapts to them. Or, as I like to think about it, when I went through this whole thing, I also accepted PPP. My bank has not put it out there yet. Chase has not put it out there yet for forgiveness, but I'm waiting for that. And I used it all for payroll. I get the easy one. It's going to be pretty straightforward. But I think about this, and in my mind, everything that's going on, and not just what comes out of Congress, and not just what comes out of the SBA, but what gets printed in the newspaper. In my mind, I say, well, if Elizabeth Warren asked me if I needed that money rather than some starving child, could I defend it? Because there's a lot of shaming going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm totally comfortable. I actually had some moral issues to work through, but I'm totally comfortable with the decision I made. But there's another program coming. If you take the money, I think you have to think in your mind, A, am I going to follow the letter of the law, which obviously the only way we could advocate is yes. But B, how is this going to look?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the second, for me, is actually a little bit scary.
Well, I mean, listen, if there's already websites posted where if you took a certain amount or above, you can just put in a zip code and out you come, right?
Yeah.
So the data is not hidden for sure. But I understand what you're saying. I do.
No, listen, PPP was put out there. The purpose of it was originally to keep small businesses running and to keep people on payroll.
Mm-hmm.
It was a noble cause. And you know what? I mean, Ian and George, I can't speak to you, but I was scared in March about how bad it was going to be. For our industry, it wasn't that bad. I didn't know that. I was very worried. So I was thinking about cutting back payroll, which is the appropriate response. As a business owner, if you have visibility that things are going south or no visibility that things are going to be good, you should respond.
Yes.
I put in a payroll reduction. I got my payroll, I think, was withdrawn on Monday. I put it in earlier. On Friday, I got my money. Had I not gotten the money, I would have cut payroll and maybe even cut heads. PPP allowed me to not do that, and that's what gives me the clear conscience. So I have no issue with having accepted it, but I just think we always need to be careful.
I agree. No, these are all valid points for sure. So before we get into what round two looks like, I would assume that because of these 2 or 3 things that we just talked about up until this point, MSPs were better positioned potentially coming into Q1 of this year, moving forward, than they had originally intended, right? Or thought about, or maybe expected to be. So what are the 2 or 3 things that every MSP should be concentrating with right now if they haven't already done it, or maybe they have done some planning, or maybe they've gone through their customers again trying to figure out if there's going to be any challenges for the first half of this year? Like, how do you lower your threshold, guys, about what's a good customer, what's not, because you just don't want to lose any revenue if at all possible? Meaning, like, you keep the bad customers even though you would have gotten rid of them in a better situation? Like, what would you be doing right now from a housekeeping standpoint?
So everyone's mileage may vary, and your individual situation dictates your individual response, right? But I would be more selective about who I would work with in today's environment versus less. If you're taking on a new customer who's not consuming your stack standard, who's not following process, who's not following plan, what other areas, you're the service provider. You are the subject matter expert who's being brought in to fix business pain. If off the bat, they're not going to follow the prescription or the formula, the calculation that you have that fixes that triangle of business owner pain, then what are you doing, right? Like you don't go to the doctor to write your own treatment plan. You don't go to the accountant to come up with your own tax strategy. They came to you for an IT strategy. It's your job to dictate that. If they want to immediately change the game, then I'm running the opposite direction, and I'm running faster now versus slower, because every time we send people out to a site, they're physically put at risk, right? And you can take as many precautions as you want, but every time my guys are physically rolling the dice when they have to walk into a building, right? So it's more risky versus less from a physical standpoint. But you only have so many hours in the day. You only have so many working days per month. You have only so many bodies in your professional services or field services divisions. And every time you go in and have an onboard flame out, you never recover that money, right? I don't know a service provider, I've yet to meet one for someone who's cost positive before month 12 of the agreement. You take a bath in the first 6 months, even if you're charging for an onboard, even if you've got relatively good hour budgeting and you're trying to cover payroll expenditure, just the amount of time, the amount of productivity, the amount of spend that you have to do against that account, you're not making money yet on that agreement. You're making money on it truly when it's stable and they're not calling you every day. So that sort of mindset of, hey, we're gonna flex down and take someone who's not willing to meet our standards because we want cash flow, right? Like if you're in that big of a crunch, you should be doing exactly like Larry said. You should be making adjustments. You should be reducing cogs. You should be talking with vendors and saying, hey, how can I reduce my feature set to have a lower price point for a bit? You should be looking at potentially utilizing a little bit of debt financing for operating costs, especially if your pipeline dictates that, hey, this is a 2-month dip, but we got people onboarding in 60 days with ink on paper. So it's a 2-month dip while we wait for revenue replacement, right? You should be using some strategic items. You should talk with your team and either reduce payroll or reduce headcount appropriately to make sure that you can weather that storm. But taking 2 steps backward for a half step forward sounds like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
All right, Larry, same question.
I 100% confirm what Ian said, knowing the data and knowing everybody to work with. First of all, even if you charge for onboarding, very few people charge for onboarding. I mean, they're thrilled to get a new client, and it's a worthwhile investment to get a new client and sink some money into it. The problem is, are they going to be a client for 3 years? It doesn't make sense if they're with you for 6 months. And now you have this issue. Well, why is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 6 months because there's nothing, like, as Ian said, they come in and they're being jerks about it? Is it going to be 6 months because they just don't have the funding as a company and they're not going to be around, or they're about to be acquired? Is it going to be 6 months because, whatever happens this summer? I mean, we're still in COVID. The world's going to get better, but we don't know how. We don't know how soon. So is it going to be 6 months because they're not going to last 6 months in COVID, or because there's going to be some other shock to the system? Are they a restaurant delivery service, which is going to crater out? I'm not thinking any poorly of any of them, but a restaurant service is going to crater out once COVID's over and people want to eat in restaurants again, and they don't need DoorDash and stuff for them. So you want to make that sort of assessment because you do need them to be a client of yours for many years. You really make an investment up front to capture sort of the dividends over time, and it takes time. It takes an investment.
Larry, is the more conservative move then, like, hey, let's say I'm cash flow tight, and let's say I'm going out there taking the clients that I normally wouldn't have taken given the situation to keep these people pumped up, right? Let's say I burned through my PPP. I'm running up against a math problem. Is the idea, hey, hedge your bets and reduce headcount rather than taking the customer it doesn't fit? Is that the thought? Or
I mean, if you have the ability, yeah, it's a really tough place to be. Like, if you've built this wonderful business with 8 to 10 techs, and you say, you know what, I'm going to pick up 4 lousy clients to keep everybody on payroll, or I'm not going to pick up everybody and I'll have to let 2 lovely people go because that's just how the correct staffing for my business. It's horrible to say, but the latter is probably the better answer. Picking up a lousy client is never a good idea. And making rash decisions in desperate times generally doesn't work out. So you really have to make a very difficult decision because, if you take those 4 lousy clients to keep these people on, you're not making more money because you're sinking as much into those clients as you would have gotten out of it. You still have to make payroll for 8 to 10 people rather than 2 fewer. You're in a worse position in 6 months. I think there's something that I've been being in a lot of the evolved peer groups, you hear some of the really great strategy. And I think it's true of clients as it is of employees. Hire slow, fire fast. Make sure you get in bed with the right people. You just don't want to regret it on the other end. And if you're not, part ways as friends.
No,
Don't
that's
drag
good.
it out. Rip the Band-Aid off. Just don't drag it.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. The two things that resonate with me off of what Larry's saying is I got a piece of advice and I forget from who, but if you're going to downsize, do it in one blow. So if you got to fire two people, don't fire one and then fire another, fire both at the same time. That fire fast aspect, try to cut once because it's demoralizing no matter when you do it. But if you do it once, you can say, hey, look, we've run the numbers. These were the two that had to go. And as long as we all work together, rise together, row in the same direction, we'll pull out of this and this should be it. But that trickle stream of cuts, it's just like in an acquisition, right? You look at the really mature acquisition based MSPs, when they acquire, they come through and they do one chop. They do one chop of clients and they do one chop of staff. They don't do trickle stream because they want to let everyone who's left afterwards, that was our cut. These were the clients we let go. These were the staff we let go. This was our one cut. You're our team. We want to move forward together. So they don't do trickle streams. They don't do waves. Another piece is that this is so no one is saying that this current environment has been documented before with modern techniques, right? The last time was Spanish flu and it's newspapers and handwritten notes, right? Like that's what exists from back then and it's very sporadic. There was not the obsession with data and collection and preservation that there is in today's society. So no strategy is not worth consideration. So if you've got a $50,000 deficit, right, that you need to fix, you got a $50,000 hole that you need to fix on an annual basis. And I'm just choosing that to have easy math, right? You can, and you have 10 staff, well, that's a $5,000 payroll reduction, right? And if you've got highly comped people, you could maybe keep your lower comped people to 3,000 or 3,500, and your higher comped people can take up a little bit more. Owner can take a little bit more. Most owners might have some pretty reasonable tax strategies, right? Talk to your tax guy and say, hey, my withholding's at $3,000 a pay period to pay for my taxes. Do I need to, can I adjust that down? Our revenue just got chopped by 400 grand at the top. Your account can plug that stuff in and send you back a quick email and say, yeah, hey, take it down from 3,000 to 1,000. Well, if you've got bi-monthly payrolls, you just saved 4 grand a month, right? Which if you multiply out is $48,000 of your $50,000 problem, right? So kind of like think outside the box. And that's where talking with your accountant, talking with Larry, talk with someone who that's their whole job is numbers analysis and say, here's all my data. Here's what it is. How can I piece together a solution, right? So if you've got that great team of 8 techs and you need to eliminate 2 of them, well, if you're over capacity and you don't want to lose that talent, you can also talk to your techs and say, hey, like, can we go down to 4 days 1 week, 3 days another week? Or other types of things, right? Can we do some creative items to backfill some of that cost structure? Can you look at your tax withholding strategy and say, hey, I'm going to withhold very, very little tax as an owner and maybe withhold very, very little 401k or retirement planning as an owner and chop my payroll down with the understanding that we've got a plan to pull out of this hole, and then you can swing back the other way. And if you had to do it for 2 months early in the year, you can backfill it 2 months at the end of the year and it washes out, right? Like, how can you think outside of the box with creative strategies? So it's worth brain power. And the number one thing that I know is that I am not a good enough numbers guy to function in a vacuum. I've got a couple of key people who I just say, I'm going to get naked fast. Here's all of my numbers. Here's all the inputs. Here's all the data. This is the number I need to solve for. Is this number right one? And how can we do it too? And very rarely do you find people who are in your circle who aren't willing to say, like, yeah, I will spend an hour, 2 hours, half a day with you to help save your business. Of course I will.
Yeah, no, this is all good stuff. And there were stories, or all throughout last year where Sometimes, decision makers went to their staff and said, would you all be willing to take a cut, temporary or whatever it is, in order to maintain people or not, right? And get the feedback back from their team, right? Like an across the board percentage, or something like that. So everybody definitely went about it differently. So let's pivot to the other side of this now, right? So, PPP 2.0 is here, or triple P, as Ian says. 2.0 is here. The rules are definitely stricter, right? So there's a good and a bad potentially. I think the good is, and we'll talk about this in a second, is that IT services and cloud services are now deductible. We'll talk about that from a sales strategy standpoint in a second. But from a structuring standpoint, let's talk about how people qualify for 2.0. Like the big thing that I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I'm reading the same thing everybody else is reading, is the 25% top line gross sales deduction or difference between 19 and 20, right? In any one quarter. Did you guys get that too?
Yeah, and I've only seen that it's Q1, 2, 3 so far. I haven't seen that they've approved Q4 for consideration. But that, day by day this changes.
Okay. So like if you haven't gone back and crunched the math, I assume it's got, like they're not going to let you be over by an inch, right? Like it's either exactly on or below, right? From you had a business hit, which obviously will disqualify a ton of people, right?
Especially in our space. This, among the clever terms that have come out of this is the K-shaped recovery. By and large, looking across, the clients, I've done research across our client base, the MSPCFO's client base. MRR was largely unimpacted. I mean, we have a couple of clients that are like 100% hospitality. Yes, they got hit. But by and large, it wasn't impacted. Projects, hardly impacted.
Yeah.
So the reason I don't think many of the clients that I work with are eligible for it. Not because they're above and beyond, they're just the best MSPs. I think just the MSP space. Remember, it's 25% year-over-year decline. So if you were at a 5 to 6% increase going into COVID, that means you had to get pretty much like a 30, 35% decline year over year. And I don't think a lot of our clients saw it. I mean, on the one hand, yes, projects went away. On the other hand, when they went away, you couldn't sell laptops fast enough.
That's the problem. The hardware sales bumped up the revenue. Right.
And it's not, declining gross margin, and your margin on hardware isn't the same as your margin on labor. It's gross revenue. So I on the one hand, yes, I think our space is now better protected because of our clients can use us for PPP. But I would be surprised if there was a large uptake in the new government offer from MSPs.
Yeah. No, that's again, speaking only through the lens of my own experience, Doberman grew 20 over 19, and most of the MSPs that I interact with also grew, right? So when this hit in March, every single one of us pulled out and did a model and said, all right, like what's it look like if we lose 10, 20, 30, 50% at MRR, right? Because we all budget off of that. We all assumed that 80% of project and hardware revenue would drop out. That was the assumption of my model, is 80% project, 80% product, and anywhere from 10 to 50% of recurring revenue reduction over time, right? So that's how we modeled it out and kind of used like rule of 78 in a backwards fashion to figure out like when is this going to start dropping off to figure it out. And what happened in reality is that MRR, like Larry mentioned, was static. Maybe some little declines here and there. A lot of the places it increased because they said, hey, work from home, we probably need to secure these extra 50 machines. Okay. No problem. Right? So it was routine increases that occurred. And projects and product shot through the roof. The strategic customer said, my office is closed. It's going to be closed for 60 days. Go in there and replace all of my infrastructure. Go in and replace the wireless access points. Go ahead and do replacement of endpoint machines. Go ahead and do a server farm refresh, right? We're not functioning as we normally are. We've gotten this triple P funding. We've got an EIDL loan, which is essentially free money with the interest and rate structures that a lot of people captured, right? We've got all of this cash. We're going to spend it because we know we're not going to close. The doctor's office knew they weren't going to close. The orthopedic surgeons are a great example, right? Hey, we're not doing hip replacements right now. You know what? It's not that people don't need hip replacements. It's now that we're going to be really not busy for 2 months and crazy busy for 4 to dig ourselves after the backlog, and then it will stabilize back out. So having those sorts of intentional conversations, we just did refresh after refresh after refresh. And the problem that we're seeing right now is that some people started pulling forward their asset plans.
Yeah.
So they said, hey, we're going to do all the assets for this year, but you know what? Like, let's do next year's too. Because this is the most like, yeah, we're losing a year off the life cycle of the machine, or we're losing a year off the life cycle of the server, but we're never going to have a better opportunity here. So this year's planned project and product sales had the bottoms drop out of it because there was never a better time to do the replacement, right? And we took the revenue because we were scared versus saying, we shouldn't modify the plan, we should stick to the plan, whatever, right? So we had a spike and now we're dealing with a drop. So the impact we're seeing is starting in Q2 of this year versus Q2 of last.
Which comes back to that age-old thing. And Larry, we talked about this last time we were on, that there is this delay that always seems to happen from the street to the MSPs, community, right? Like there's that 4-6 month-ish buffer zone, right? Before things ultimately matriculate through, right?
Right. I mean, as Ian's talking about, like, you didn't really, when COVID happened, we were all wondering how we're going to make payroll, and that's why we took PPP.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't think, holy cow, I'm not going to have 20. It didn't even occur to me in March that an MSP would say, I'm not going to have 2021 capital expenditure for my clients because it's all going to happen this year. That, in theory, that is the most ass backward approach, but it makes sense when it really happens. But no one's thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing to me that makes me worried, like we talked in the beginning, we talked in the spring. I mean, my concern wasn't that our space would be killed. My concern was that small businesses would go out of business, that our client base. I mean, obviously, healthcare is different.
A lot did.
A lot did, and then the MSPs would have trouble because they'd have nobody to service. Thankfully, that wasn't as bad as we thought. But we have to think now, as Ian's pointing out, maybe there's going to be less capex in 2021 because they took it all. For his guys to go in when there's nobody sitting there at the desks, my God, they must have been 15 times more efficient than they've ever been in the past.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No one to bother them, nothing, no one to worry about when your computer's up or down. But you also need to think, well, otherwise, what's 2021 going to look like? No one's gotten on a plane except for, a couple people are basically not getting on planes since last March. That's going to go crazy the other way. No one's eating at restaurants. That's going to go the other way. It looks like a lot of money that was given to people went into savings. People are going to start spending money. We might have an issue where there's a boom in the economy that MSPs are going to need to digest, and it's going to be a little more than they're used to digesting.
That's true.
I mean, the U.S. economy hasn't seen real 5% growth in a really long time. And, Ian, if you get, for example, if you had 6 wonderful clients knock on your door tomorrow, it's a curse of riches. It's still a curse. Like, you can't digest 6 new clients in a month.
Yep.
And this is a real possibility, which goes to what Ian said before. You got to be flexible. What happened last year happened super fast. We had 2 weeks basically from when they started kicking the kids out of schools to when it really got awful and you couldn't go to the supermarket. It's not going to be that fast, I think, this year. The recovery's there's no way it's going to be that fast. But we still need to know, those 2 weeks you made and you adapted your company. Well, over the next 6 months, what's going to happen is what should have taken 5 years. So you're going to have to be able to adapt your company that way.
Okay.
Yep.
Fair. That's all fair.
Be able to continue to write new models.
That's great. Who would have thought too much business is a problem, right? I mean, that could potentially be the reaction here. Let's talk about the sales strategy for a second, right? So before, there was a big push by some people in the IT community to lobby Congress and their representatives to have cloud services and IT services and the stuff that will enable people to work remotely to be included as part of PPP 1.0. It didn't make it in, but it made it into 2, interestingly enough. Now, people who are eligible for 2.0 can deduct, and I don't know what the percentage is, maybe one of you guys caught that, they can deduct up to a certain point, I assume, in technology services and anything that helps them, basically facilitate the rebound, right? So from a prospecting standpoint, or even from an existing customer standpoint that they've struggled, how do you help position this from on the other side of the house, right? From let's use this to go out there and generate some new revenue.
So, I hate to be the guy who rains on a parade, but I don't think it modifies the sales pitch much at all. I think that when you're having strategic conversations about technology basis points, temporary items like a small windfall of 100 or 200 grand into a company creates a tactic-based discussion, but not the basis point. So you think about an MSP deal, right? And they're paying you $75,000 a year. Well, that's a $225,000 commitment to your average MSP, plus another $100,000 to $120,000 over those 3 years, right? So you're all in close to 400 large, 350 to 400 with this person. I'm not going to get in bed with this person over a 20K spiff that I might be able to use in something, right? Like the 20,000, you'll pay the 20,000 to save a $400,000 mistake every day and twice on Sunday. So the strategic based customer that most MSPs at least want to target, if not are targeting and are messaging to, is going to already be aware of, hey, I can probably write off some of this. So the most important thing is to be able to answer the question, what portion of your recurring bill falls under the triple P aspect, and maybe do some existing messaging to clients. Hey, if you are targeting the existing triple P, reach out to us and we'll do a bill walk with you to let you know, hey, this is the amount per month for your period of our services that falls into that. And we can review your existing outside third-party bills for you or alongside you with your accountant to say, yes, this is, yes, this is, yes, this is, no, this isn't. So act as a resource and a filter to try to make it easy for them for their documentation. But for a potential sales, I'm not going to walk in and say, hey, like, did you know that if you hire me, you can write off $10,000 on your triple P funding, right? Like that's not really the conversation I'm having. I'm going to say like, hey, what's the last year looked for you when it came to system accessibility and what struggles did you have?
Right. The other thing to think about, and I haven't looked that much into how the technology works, is at least in last year's PPP, you couldn't hire someone right before you got it. It was your spend over a trailing period of time, and those numbers changed. So maybe you can make the argument, don't cut back on me because the PPP advance, you're not going to get forgiven if you don't continue to spend that. Although I'm sure they could find other ways to spend it now. It's tough, I think, and I'd have to look at the language that I didn't see. It's tough, I think, to sell somebody on the fact they're going to get a deduction because last year it was not included. Any last minute stuff before PPP was not included.
And again, like just with going back to a point that Larry made, the rules on this are changing. And so like taking politics entirely aside, across every area of the federal government, especially executive branch, every single decision maker is changing in the next 30 to 60 days. Everyone, universally, top to bottom, left to right, everyone is changing. And the entire strategy of the government is changing over the next 30 to 60 days. So rules and regulations around how this stuff is administered are going to be a big asterisk, subject to change, right? So just I would just be careful. Like one of the things that I always keep in mind during my sales process is I don't make a promise I can't 100% keep.
Mhm.
Elsewise, it's we will attempt. I give you no guarantees, and it could go the opposite direction, because I would much rather keep my word every time to that new client than to promise the fences and have it be a bunt, right? Like I don't want to not deliver on that new relationship, even if it was only 5 or 10 grand, right? Like that's kind of a drop in the bucket when it comes to a business's spend. But I promised that and it didn't happen, right? That's not okay.
That's a good point. Hey, do this deal based on this deduction, and then you don't get the deduction. That would
Yeah.
be.
I'm not an accountant. I'm not going to promise you anything on your tax strategy. I'm going to say, hey, you might want to talk to your tax guy. There could be some potential here for savings if you weren't aware. So it's newsletter content. It's not sales stuff, right? Like, hey, talk to your accountant about this. You might have some referral opportunities, some things like that, right? Well, we're in between accountants. Well, hey, let me connect you with my client, right? Or let me connect you with my guy. So you got some potential around it, but I wouldn't use it in my pitch. I would stay
Not
far away from that.
honestly didn't even think about it. I'm looking at this saying, hey, this could be a nice win, but you're right.
Mhm.
If it could be a mirage, right? It could disappear on.
That could also be the buzzsaw that you just put yourself in front of.
No, hey, no, I appreciate it. Hey, truth is better than not, so I'll take that. Larry, where are your customers? What are your customers feeling? Now that we're in 2021, we're here, right? No more thinking about what's coming. We're in it. What's the feeling like from a strategy for the foreseeable future, right? Are these people largely just continuing what was happening at the tail end of last year, or have people pivoted to try and do something different now that we're here, right? Whether it be get more aggressive with marketing and sales, get more aggressive with trying to increase revenue from existing customers, or are they still largely status quo and let's just toe the line?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, largely we're still, many things haven't changed. I was on a conversation with a client 2 days ago, and he's dealing with COVID in the office. Like he has an outbreak, and several employees he's quarantined. Several of his employees are quarantined. That didn't change just because we started a new year. That did not change because the administration changed. So that absolutely continues. People are still extremely COVID aware.
Mhm.
Um, you it's so that's something that's there. In terms of their growth and marketing, listen, I'm not sure exactly how it's working for them. I mean, I think you're probably still very much in a referral space right now. You're wanting to do great work and get good people to talk about you to other people. But I can speak to more so from my perspective, as a vendor. Referrals also are hampered by the fact that people aren't having dinner together. They're not going to conferences together.
Yeah.
So you may knock the socks off, Ian may knock the socks off of his local, one of his orthopedic clients. The guy's not going to an orthopedic conference saying, you know what, that nonsense you're working with, Doberman took care of it for me. You should talk to them. That probably is his main source of leads. And
No.
I don't, I mean, Ian, you can disagree.
Your average MSP, I would 100% agree. Doberman is a non-referral based organization, right? We are happy to have referrals, but we grow through intentional outbound and inbound cultivation. So,
Yeah. So, I mean, you
and
actually,
that's probably your point. That's
yeah,
probably your point, right?
I
Like
think,
start developing those other lines.
I can speak to it again. It's a little bit different from the MSP than from my perspective, but George, I know you and I have discussed this. If people were referral based, if people were doing stuff based on, having lunch and learns in their community or their Rotary Club and just understanding how local, that's stopped.
Yeah.
So if I were a marketing person, this would be an incredibly exciting year. You get to try out every new strategy. You're not fighting any sort of institutional, well, this has always worked, why would we ever change? Because nothing's working now. And you just try a bunch of stuff. Most of it's fairly cheap. So I think they're all trying to grow. I think everyone is trying to figure it out. And unfortunately, different businesses have different strategies that work for them. So there's no sort of one size fits all. You know, we've done outbound. We know outbound has worked for other people. Content has worked. I know that you get on a bus and travel to parking lots around the country. That's worked as well. It's people didn't get on buses 2 years ago, not because it was a bad idea. It just nobody forced them to make that decision. So I think people are having to become very creative, and it's exciting.
Yep.
I,
Yeah.
I'm right there with you, Larry. Getting on a bus 2 years ago was not top of mind. We did it because everything else was shut down.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, no, just having that strategic plan, right? I threw this out in the chat too earlier when a question around marketing popped up, right? Just get a plan with deliverables, measurables, and tactics, right? And your plans for 2021. So there's 12 months in 2021, you know, soon to be 11. So if you're kicking your plan off in February, you got 11 months. What are your milestones? What are your deliverables? What are your measurables? What are your tactics? Every marketing professional I've always talked to says the plan comes in two pieces. It's infrastructure and then tactics and measuring, right? So you got to spend the time getting on message, updating content, updating website, updating collateral, wrapping vehicles, whatever, training your team so that everyone talks in the same way and relays the same message. So getting that message and brand alignment. And then it's all about like, okay, now that we just spun the flywheel, right? Every month you're spinning that flywheel of marketing, and that's digital or whatever else you might be doing, outbound, your website, content, all that type of stuff. You're spinning that flywheel and you're looking, and you've got 10 different things that you're doing, or 5 different things, or 3 different things. Your specific direction may vary. Well, you're just measuring them. And if, hey, LinkedIn is going through the roof, and Facebook isn't doing anything for me, well, let's trim Facebook and let's dump money into LinkedIn, right? So you keep that spend the same, but you lower here and raise there. And universally, the other piece that I've always heard is consistency is important.
Mm-hmm.
But marketing's not a short-term plan, right? Like if you are looking at marketing as a short-term fix, like you're 18 to 24 months away from that doing anything for you.
Yep.
And sometimes you're getting lucky and sometimes it's hitting quick, right? But the average, I forget the source on this, but when I was doing research on it, the average return in the first year of a marketing plan is $1.10 back to dollar spent. So if you spend $100,000 on average, you might get back 110,000. Right? Like that's not a huge growth. And so sure, some of that might be recurring that carries forward year over year or whatever, right? But like it is expensive and time consuming.
It does get better in year 2, right?
Well, depends. Sure. Your mileage may vary, Larry. I'm not a marketing professional either.
But this is why jumping between marketing companies every 6 months is going to get you nowhere. Yeah. Absolutely.
You got to pick.
Everybody's going to shift their strategy. You're on a new strategy. You've reset the clock, and now you're waiting all over again.
6 months, you just finished your infrastructure design. You're firing your partner when stuff's about to go, right? So you should be doing your research and looking at what people are, look at what your peers are saying and kind of discount a little bit around 3-month people. Well, I was with them for 3 months and nothing happened, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, that's kind of impatient, immature look at marketing. But talk with folks who have worked with someone for multiple years and who are an active participant. Too often, people view marketing and view an agency as well, I'm just going to throw money at you and you're going to do it all. No, it doesn't work that way. They are marketers. They're not MSPs. They don't know what a firewall is any more than your client does. So you can't just like throw a bunch of vendor vomit at them and throw a bunch of techno mumbo jumbo at them and expect it to work. You have to be an active participant. You have to problem solve. You have to manage it. This is just like an employee, except for the cost of the employee, you're getting 20 people who are specialists in their area. But if you're not managing it intentionally, you're going to get the same thing as if you let your help desk tech run off and do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's going to burn you bad.
It's a strong message, but it's a clear one. Real quick, Dave Grubb chats in. He's like, Ian, what's your current CTR looking like on social channels?
Click-through rate is the way I interpret that TLA, but be careful about TLAs, Dave, because what you think the TLA is might not be the TLA to me. And TLA is a Microsoft term for 3-letter acronym. So my click-through rate's about 10%, Dave. So
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Final thoughts, Larry? Any advice to give people out there in the world?
You know, going through this past year with PPP, with everything that's going on, I think one thing that's really proven out is having systems in place. You know, you talk about being able to go to Gusto to get a form to put into PPP, and hopefully I'll get a form. I use Gusto as well to ask for forgiveness. Ian talks about a client coming to him and saying, "This is our, you know, this is your monthly spend with me." I mean, it's not a game changer, but it's a level of professionalism that I think really helps you. And somebody who's not able to provide that is somebody that you walk away from if they otherwise can do the service. So it's needing to have all your ducks in the row, because the interesting thing about this past year is nobody predicted it. And if you think about it from as much time as we've been doing this, you know, we had in my professional life, I lived through September 11th. I lived through the financial crisis, and now we're living through COVID. 3 totally different issues.
Yeah.
All of them required rapid planning and rapid reaction, and the ability to say, I know where my stuff is. I can use it to make a plan. If you're sitting there on September 12th, if you're sitting there after the markets crash and you're wondering, who's my banker? If you're sitting there when COVID hits and you're saying, do I have all my employees' cell phones? Do I have a payroll processor that's good enough? I may not need it, but is it there? My point is, as much as ever, get your ducks in a row now, not because you absolutely need them to be there. It's an insurance policy. You don't buy fire insurance because you want your house to burn down, but you're going to have issues. So get everything in order for the next time this happens, because the next time this does happen, and it will happen, hopefully it won't be for another 10 years. It won't be COVID. It'll be something else. And the more you have ready, the more you'll be able to react to whatever happens.
Oh, that's good advice. Let's like Boy Scouts, right? Be prepared.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Ian, final thoughts?
You know, I'll just restate what Larry said. And this comes from really smart guy, Tom Patterson from the Patterson Center. If you plan the work and work the plan will work. So start creating a plan around those deficits, right? So I'm a big fan of doing a little bit of perspective exercises. So turn that mirror inward, look at the organization and stop having sacred cows. How are we failing in sales? How are we failing in marketing? How are we failing in service delivery? How are we failing in intercommunication, in education, in continual improvement, in growth? Whatever you might be looking at, look at each piece of the organization, create a hit list, and start creating a plan around incrementally getting 1% better in those areas day over day, right? Like start atomic habiting yourself to death. Start doing EOS and moving rocks, adopt StratUp and create some AIPs. Whatever you might do, just start coming up with a plan about getting better. Because if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, because this industry is starting to move fast. Everybody's found the same tool set. Everybody's found the same strategies. Everybody's found the same methodology. So if you ain't moving forward, you are getting left behind, because everybody's got their foot on the gas right now.
That is very true. Very, very true. Larry, how do people find you online?
Come to www.mspcfo.com. You can reach out, and we're happy to have a conversation. Anybody who wants to follow up. If you want to see the product, there's a link on there. We can do a demo. Happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. Ian, if people are willing to reach out to you, are you willing to give them back some love? And
yeah. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Up on LinkedIn. You know, it's probably a photo of me in a tux. That's usually what ends up on LinkedIn. So hit me up on LinkedIn, doberman.net. Can always reach out to me there too. But hit me up. More than happy to have a chat.
Awesome. Good people out there with good advice, guys. There's no reason not to reach out, because if you don't, then you're on your own, and there's no reason to be on your own. Even if just to talk shop, sometimes it goes a lot further than you think. Thanks everybody for watching. This whole session was recorded. You'll go find that at mspinitiative.com. And you can rewind, fast forward to whoever. It's It's actually some pretty good content in today's schedule. I really appreciate these two gentlemen for taking an hour out of their day. I know they're super busy, and I know you're super busy. So thank you for taking time out to watch this. And again, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 o'clock Eastern time, you will find us MSP Initiative live. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
See y'all.